Karl Wallenda's Final Walk, 1978. Karl Wallenda was no ordinary tightrope walker. He was a legend. For decades, his family, the Flying Wallendas, had thrilled audiences by performing stunts so dangerous they were described as death-defying. But Karl was different. He had a rule: no safety net. He called it an insult, a distraction. To him, the thrill was in knowing one slip meant death. At 73, when most men are in rocking chairs, Karl was still walking wires stretched hundreds of feet above the ground. In San Juan, Puerto Rico, he prepared for yet another spectacle, crossing between two hotel towers, nearly 120 feet in the air. The day was windy. Gusts rattled windows and snapped palm trees. Friends begged him not to perform, but Karl insisted. Thousands gathered below, craning their necks as he stepped onto the swaying cable. At first, it was perfect. His pole swaying gently, his feet gliding across the steel. But halfway across, the wind struck harder. The wire vibrated. His body swayed violently. Gasps filled the crowd. For a brief second, he steadied himself. And then suddenly, his balance broke. Karl toppled sideways, arms clawing at the air. Witnesses described the fall as hauntingly slow, like time itself had stretched. Then, the crack, his body slamming into the pavement below. His head hit first. Blood pooled beneath him as the crowd stood frozen, silent, until someone screamed. The man who had danced with death his entire life finally lost. And he did it in front of an audience that would never forget the sound of his final act. Tyke the Elephant Rampage, 1994, Honolulu, Hawaii. The circus tent was alive with excitement. Parents bought cotton candy, children tugged at balloons, and under the bright lights stood Tyke, the star elephant. To the crowd, she was majestic. To her trainers, she was a problem. Years of abuse had built up inside her, a storm waiting to explode. On that August night, it did. The show began as normal, music blasting, Tyke paraded before cheering kids. But something snapped. Suddenly, she swung her massive body and attacked her trainer. With one violent thrust, her tusk pierced his body. He screamed as she lifted him into the air and slammed him down. Blood sprayed across the ring as she crushed him underfoot. Panic tore through the tent. Parents dragged their children away, screams drowning out the circus music. Tyke charged out of the arena, smashing fences, flipping cars, a 12,000-pound force of rage. On the streets of Honolulu, chaos reigned. Witnesses described her as possessed, eyes wide, foam pouring from her mouth. Police surrounded her, opening fire. Bullets ripped into her body. 1, 5, 10, then dozens. Tyke staggered forward, covered in blood, refusing to fall. It took over 80 rounds before she collapsed, her massive body shaking the pavement. The children who came for magic left with nightmares. And Tyke's bloody rampage ended not just her life, but the innocence of everyone who watched. The Hartford Circus Fire, 1944, July 6, 1944. Hartford, Connecticut. The Ringling Brothers Circus was in full swing, nearly 7,000 people packed under the big top. Clowns juggled, lions roared, trapeze artists flew overhead. For the children, it was heaven on earth, but overhead, disaster was brewing. The canvas had been fireproofed, with a deadly mixture of paraffin wax and gasoline. It was a recipe for catastrophe. It began with a flicker, a small flame licking the side of the tent. A few in the crowd noticed, but the show went on. Within minutes, fire raced across the canvas. The roof turned into an inferno, raining burning wax onto the stands. Clothes ignited instantly. Hair caught fire. The air filled with the screams of children. Panic erupted. Families rushed for the exits, but the exits were bottlenecks, clogged with bodies. People tripped, were trampled, crushed under the stampede. Parents threw children over the rails to save them, only to lose sight of them in the chaos. Survivors would later describe the smell, the stench of burning flesh, the sight of charred bodies locked together in their final embrace. By the time it was over, 168 were dead. Entire families erased in minutes. Survivors carried scars, both physical and mental, for the rest of their lives. The Hartford fire wasn't just a tragedy. It was hell itself, unleashed under the big top. The human cannonball. Misfires. The human cannonball was always one of the most thrilling acts. A man, or woman, launched like a missile, flying through the air before landing in a net. It looked like freedom. But when the calculations were even slightly off, it turned into death. In the 1970s, in England, a cannon stunt went horribly wrong. The performer was blasted out at nearly 70 miles per hour. But the net was misaligned. Instead of landing safely, his body smashed into the ground like a car wreck. Bones shattered instantly. His skull cracked on impact, blood splattering across the sawdust as the crowd screamed in horror. It wasn't the only time. In another misfire, a cannonball overshot the net entirely, the performer crashing headfirst into a steel pole. His neck snapped on impact. In yet another, the cannon malfunctioned, firing too low, slamming the body straight into the ground. The human cannonball was billed as the closest a man could come to flying. For some, it became the closest they came to dying, until they finally did, in front of horrified spectators. The Lion's Revenge, 1911. Brooklyn, New York. The crowd buzzed with anticipation. Tonight's finale was famous. The lion tamer would place his head inside the jaws of a lion. Children leaned forward. Parents smiled nervously. It was dangerous, yes, but that was the point. The trainer stepped forward, stroked the lion's mane, and gently lowered his head between the beast's jaws. The audience gasped, waiting for the daring escape. But the lion had other plans. With a sudden, violent snap, its teeth sank into the man's skull. Blood poured instantly, running down his face. The trainer screamed, trying to pull away, but the jaws clamped tighter, tearing flesh, cracking bone. At first, the audience laughed, assuming it was part of the act. But when blood began spraying against the cage, the laughter turned to screams. The lion dragged the man across the floor, tearing at his throat until his body went limp. Handlers rushed in with poles, beating at the beast, but it was too late. The cage was red. The crowd was in shock. Children sobbed, parents fainted. The circus had promised a grand finale, and it delivered, just not the one anyone expected. If you want to hear more of these haunting true stories, stay with me, because there are many more waiting to be told. And if this video kept you watching, don't forget to like and subscribe. It means a lot, and it helps me bring you more of history's darkest tragedies.